Good evening. I would like to call the Tuesday, December 21st Board of Selectmen's meeting to order. Can we all please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I don't have any announcements this evening. Is there anyone here for anything that is currently not posted on our agenda? Seeing as none, we can move right into the first agenda item, which is the local cultural council appointment of Dylan Larson Parker and possible votes. In our packet, we have an application from Dylan for a 3-year term. Diane? Diane, I'm sorry, Diane. That's awful.
I forgive you.
You can throw stuff at me. Where are those tomatoes that he was talking about? So when you have all members currently in full support of the applicant, if you want to come on up and tell us a little bit about yourself. And first of all, thank you for volunteering. It's nice to see more of these appointments coming through.
Okay, good. Told me that you need some people on the committee. And I thought that I could be of service. I take art classes and I go to all the shows at the farm, and I belong to a few nonprofit organizations that have things like festivals, and which I help out at, and so I thought that I could be some help.
I don't really have any questions, just mostly gratitude for offering to volunteer. I appreciate it sincerely.
Definitely. Make a motion that we approve the appointment for a 3-year term to the local cultural council.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
And
Hal's not on yet.
Hal is not on yet. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, agenda item number 2 is Oktoberfest location discussion and possible votes. We do have the Oktoberfest committee that's here in presence. I also have our public safety chiefs, Nick and Kent, and Mr. Furno with Highway. The reason behind this isn't so much talking about relocation or things like that. It's the opportunity to give our public safety chiefs the opportunity to talk about some of their concerns as it pertains to the current location of the Oktoberfest, and probably come up or determine to see if there's a way that we can come up to remedy some of those, whatever it may turn into. In the essence of going through this, I wanted to at least start the conversation with our public safety chiefs so they could get some of their concerns out there out in the public, and obviously have the Oktoberfest committee part of the conversation, discussion, and see where it goes from there. Does that work?
Good evening, guys.
Good evening.
Evening, chiefs.
So just to get started, I think the biggest hurdle for the police department has obviously been the traffic. The event really has grown over the past couple years, and we've seen a huge increase in truck traffic. 18-wheelers, construction trucks, pulling trailers. We're talking about the day of the event on Saturdays, and it's just, I don't think we can continue to send those big trucks down Cook Street, over the bridge, especially with the weight limit on the trucks, on the bridge. And the congestion and the parking, all goes hand in hand for us. It's like everything is in one congested location. So we have our mechanic to cook, but we also got the majority of the parking is in Soldiers Field. So we get to the point where Soldiers Field gets full, but we still have people coming down Mechanic Street trying to get into Soldiers Field. Now, Soldiers Field is full, so those people that are pulling in, if there's nobody there, which are trying to get out because there's no parking spots left. So now we have to stop traffic on the bridge. We got cars coming down B Street. Now, if someone leaves here to go here to try and uncongest that, 2 or 3 cars park on B Street, even though there's no parking signs, and then we have another nightmare because now we can't get that 18-wheeler that's coming down the road. So we've had, it's constant. It's just chasing cars, and the area is just too small. My biggest concern at this point, if it was just cars going around there, we would probably be able to handle it. But we've seen such an increase in truck traffic. Sooner or later, we've been lucky over the years, but my feeling, sooner or later, we're gonna have something. We get, a jackknife truck down there, or a tanker, that gets into an accident, and there's, if there's ever a hazmat condition on top of anything else, the accident, on top of having the accident there and only one way for traffic to go, now we're gonna evacuate thousands of people because you don't know what's in that truck. I'm not saying that's, gonna happen, but there's potential for a lot of bad things to happen with that amount of traffic. And it's mainly the trucks. Like I said, if it was just the cars, we could probably deal with it without an issue. But I'm concerned about the trucks and the liability on us or the town, or something happening with one of those trucks. We were very fortunate this year. I had a couple trucks that just ended up on that road, and frankly, if they weren't good drivers, we would have been in a lot of trouble, because they had inches to make the turn coming out of Cook Street and getting onto the bridge, and even getting over it. And there's truck drivers that will stop and tell you that, I can't go over that bridge. And now you're already there, there's no way to go. Once those trucks get into a certain area of town, there's no turning them back. There's only one way to go. With cars on both sides of the street from Franklin and West Street all the way down to Main Street, if a truck gets past GBI, like a tractor trailer, even if we try and stop trucks from even coming down to that area, if one sneaks by, there's only one place for them to go, because once they get into a certain part of town, you're not backing them up and you have no way to turn them around. There's either you gotta stop traffic on the other end and try and let them make that loop, but now, I mean, I don't even wanna send them over the bridge.
Right.
Because of the weight limit. And frankly, I just don't know if there's a way to remedy that. I don't know if there's a way to stop all the trucks. And like I said, once you get a truck to a certain point, there's really no turning back as far as where we put them.
It's difficult that we're in this time, but we have to think worst-case scenario all the time. It's constant risk assessment. It's planning ahead of time, have an emergency action plan from somebody who drives into a parade or into a crowd. That's why you saw trucks at the end of the streets this year. It was congested, which is good to see, but it's also a nightmare for us if we have a fire in that area. We're just going to not be able to do our job efficiently and effectively, and laying hose lines and things like that. And also right down to something as simple as a medical in the area. And we have a UTV for down in that area if we have to move somebody. But once again, that's not always, it's not always, just a medical area, say at the beer tent or something like that, could be very difficult for us to get to. I rode around on the UTV a little bit. It was difficult to get around, even at Depot Street and where the Olive Branch is, just trying to get through those type areas. People are there to have a good time, and they're not really situationally aware the way we're trained to be, but so it just makes it difficult for medicals, for if God forbid we have a fire in that area. We were a little bit more focused this year. We had the Emergency Operations Center set up in the primary school parking lot. We had MEMA there helping us with radios coordinated. We had mutual aid in helping us. We had 2 of our own ambulances on. And again, the town split in half with that. So we had to have an engine cover one side of town, and then hopefully we can mitigate any emergencies that are down there. Thankfully, we haven't had anything really serious at Oktoberfest, but the likelihood of something happening at some point, and it's sort of like we have one hand tied behind our back. And we all enjoy the event, and just like everybody, but we have jobs to do, and we have people in the town to protect, and we're not even able to effectively protect that area of town that is so congested, because we can't get apparatus and things where we need to go. And if you saw the incident action plan, we had a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that I don't think people are even aware of. And we don't really want to make them aware of it, just because we want to have the upper hand. Would you concur with that, Chief?
Absolutely. We do. We have a command post set up, and we have a lot of resources behind the scenes for that worst-case scenario that we would be negligent if we didn't plan for. So we do it every year. We plan for it. I mean, traffic, frankly, is the least of my worries in an event like that, but it's one of the things that, you know, we have to worry about, especially with that bridge and with the increase in the trucks. But there are a lot of things behind the scenes that we do, that we have to plan for, and hope that the things that we do plan for never happen.
So are these trucks coming down our way now more because?
I think I think you see a lot of them Medline, Uxbridge, a lot of them come from Uxbridge, a lot of them coming from 146, but you see also, you got a lot of heavy construction equipment.
Trailer dumps.
Trailer dumps, people doing jobs on Saturdays that aren't looking at a GPS, that are pulling a tractor, a big trailer, you know, trying to make that corner. And like I said, once you get them in past Franklin and West Street,
You own 'em.
you own them. There's
them.
no turning them around. Same thing.
Yep.
Coming from 146. In 146, they can get off on 16, or they get off on Lackey Dam. There seems to be an increase. I mean, even Goya runs Saturday. Years ago, when Dewey Pile was over in Webster, and Dewey Pile trucks were going through here left and right, we would send letters. We would send letters to Dewey Pile, and, you know, that would cut their truck traffic, but you just can't plan for every truck, and there's certainly been an increase.
To address the traffic and only the traffic, if we moved the detours farther out from the area, number one, can we do that? And number two is, if so, does it accomplish anything, especially with the trucks?
I looked at it, and I really don't think it does, because once you get a truck in that area, it's hard for them to make that swing no matter where you go,
Yep.
no matter where they're coming from.
Can't force them just up West Street?
That'd be a tricky one to
Up,
turn.
if they're coming, with cars on both sides of the road, I even have there's cars parked on both sides, probably at the beginning of West Street, too. Got some photos, but making that turn, and then they go back up West Street, and where do they go from there? They are gonna have a hard time making that turn back down Rydell, and making it down Rydell, or even Grove.
Right.
Or even if you turned them, even if you had someone at the highway department, you couldn't turn them up Rydell. The only thing that you could do is, you'd have to be somewhere before the highway department,
Yeah.
and you'd have to stop everything coming eastbound, turn them around at highway, and send them back to wherever they came from. And then you would have to have someone way on the other end, and hope that nobody gets in that zone, gets in that no return zone. And I don't even know if we have the authority to do that, to be honest with you. I mean, in an emergency situation, we would. The road's closed, you got no option, you know, you turn it around. But if someone is gonna oppose that, you know, and you're gonna get somebody who's gonna oppose that, and I don't know if what authority we have to, he's like, oh, you got a detour set up, I'll go through. Well, the bridge, you know, you're not gonna make it across the bridge. I mean, there's a small chance of that happening, but I mean, it's something that could happen. And there's no really easy place, if you look at that, you do that on either end. You'd have to have kind of like a roadblock set up
Yeah.
on each side, because you can't have, you're gonna see a tractor trailer coming from 146 into Douglas is doing 40 miles coming into town from Uxbridge into Douglas on 16 at any point.
place I could think you could do that would be
But you got,
where 16 comes in at that four-way by the gazebo.
there's a lot, it would take a lot of resources, and like I said, I don't know if we have the authority to do it or the resources to do it, but you would have to have somebody up on that end of Uxbridge Douglas, then you'd have 146 and even Northeast Main Street.
Yep.
If someone comes down Northeast Main Street and comes up, once they get up the hill and you're at the intersection, again, they're in that no return zone. They're not gonna take that left going up Davis Street by the school. They're gonna have to come into town, and they're not gonna make that right going onto North Street back to 146.
I mean, we can't send them, if we sent them across Rydell to Grove to Mumford, the sharp corner on Mumford where the old farmhouse is Ebling's house, they'll never make the turn, the tractor trailers, you know, I think you're familiar with that, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we've sat together, racked our brains, tried to figure out the best detour. I don't know where that best detour is because of, Douglas is still the old cart path roads on some of them, and we're kind of outgrowing some of it. So, you know, as we redo roads, yeah, we could make it wider here, this corner, but it's still Douglas, and we're still in the country. So we've sat together, drawn up maps, and there's just no easy solutions. So that's why we're here having this conversation.
I'm just thinking off the top of my head, as opposed to closing both lanes on Main Street, if we shifted it a little bit further back and closed one lane, would that alleviate some of that, or do you think you're just creating another nightmare?
Now you just have people walking by a lane of traffic.
Yeah, you
That's
got,
just
there's
not-
so many people in that zone between,
yeah.
there's just really, it gets, you're shoulder to shoulder at one point. I don't think that we could get, honestly don't think we could get a truck through safely anyway.
I think it'd be awful.
I wouldn't want anything with, I wouldn't want to take the chance of sending a vehicle through that zone,
Yeah.
even one lane with that many people.
Bad thought, sorry about that.
No, I thought.
Did you have,
Oh, yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. You know, the one thing I can think of is, you know, I obviously don't have a suggestion as to a better route, but if you talk, Chief, you talked about authority for some of these more remote signage. You know, if you were thinking about something like putting up signs at, you know, the key choke points, you know, 16 and 146, or, you know, on the other end. I think what you'd be talking about would be like a temporary truck exclusion. And, you know, you can, Chapter 40, Section 22 lets you do truck exclusion orders, but they have to be approved by the state. And so, well, you've got enough time now that if you were talking about trying to do a temporary truck exclusion, you could probably send it up to the state and see if they'd be willing to give you that authority. That's-
Yeah, certainly something to look at.
is the, I don't know, one second, is the truck exclusion like, you can put that up on 146, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tractor trailer is going to adhere to it.
Well, the usual truck exclusion that you see is where a town decides it wants to put a weight limit on the vehicles that go through a particular neighborhood. And I don't remember what the gross weight cutoff is, but once a truck exclusion order goes up, somebody runs the sign, goes into the excluded area, you can cite it, don't get out of Dodge. I mean, it's binding. It's not
Okay.
advisory, it's binding. So, you know, if there's a way to work with the state to maybe get again, if you identify key choke points and get a truck exclusion order, you know, for those key choke points, maybe. And it's binding.
Still left to you to enforce the order, though. You need
Yeah,
to-
that's-
You need to have enough people to do
Yeah,
it.
you gotta
Yeah.
do that, and like I said, and I agree with you that that's great, but even with the signs, we do details all the time. Some people abide by the signs, some people don't. Some people stop their car and point, and I go that way, you know, with a road closed sign. I mean, we laugh, but
Some people go that way anyway.
It happens. In truckers, I mean, you have professional truck drivers, very professional truck drivers, just like any other profession. You have some who aren't so professional. They're going from point A to point B the fastest way they think it is. If their GPS tells them to go this way and they're comfortable going that way, the problem is, we get one or two into that zone, and now we have no way to put them but over that bridge. And if something happens on that bridge, and we send them that way,
We own it.
we own that problem at that point, and we own whatever comes after it. That's, you know, that's the concern. It's not, I mean, like I said, if it was strictly car traffic, we could probably deal with that. In the parking issues, it's the trucks that are the biggest concern.
And Rich, those truck exclusions, if we get authorization from the state, they can be limited to just that day.
That's what you'd be looking for.
All right. And then hope that they listen.
Yeah, I mean, the typical one is, it's more in nature of a permanent thing, but, you know, things being what they are.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
What's the typical time frame to get a truck exclusion permit? And the reason why I ask is there's a lot of planning that goes involved with this event, so.
I don't think I could honestly say, you know, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. It just depends on how quickly Mass Highway, public safety are moving. You know, they also have to approve just about a lot of road signage that goes up, so they're always looking at stuff. You know, I think it's the kind of thing that if you wanted to do something like that, and you brought it to the attention of your legislators and asked them to, you know,
Step
Escort
up.
it along.
Yep.
yes, shepherd it through lanes.
Handle it.
That's what it is.
And that's still pending on if the state opts to approve it. It's not guaranteed they will.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, typically they're looking at, you know, more permanent ones rather than temporary ones. If you get a lot of trucks passing through, there's a reason why there's a lot of trucks passing through. It's because it's a major trucking route. Whether it's suitable for that's another question. You know, they're gonna take into account that there's a lot of truck traffic going on. That's probably a good reason. So those are things that they weigh. But look, it's a big event. I wouldn't think one day is gonna ruin it.
So I also have the folks from Oktoberfest. I definitely want to hear from you guys as well. I don't know if there's a way to make room to have everybody up here. At least give them a chance to address some of the concerns and see what we can do. That. I feel like Moses.
Now we know who has the most power in the Oktoberfest vote.
Splitting of the chiefs.
There's only 4 of us.
Oh, all right.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Evening, folks.
Hello.
I said good evening. Hi, Tony. That's what I was saying. Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
So,
Go ahead.
no, you go ahead. I understand.
No, I'll tee it up. What happens if we change the location of Oktoberfest?
I'll grab that one. There's no more Oktoberfest from this committee. You guys have the appointing authority. You know, you can appoint a new committee to do it. I think you're going through the years that we would certainly help whoever wanted to volunteer to take it on and, you know, give them whatever resources that we've accumulated over the years. But there would be no appetite for the 4 of us to, you know, to move it. So, you know, I don't know. Tony used to say that he was really excited when the Goodness Store started charging for parking. Like that was like the we had made it moment. Like, everyone was really excited that we were putting on an event that someone would actually charge parking for. And, you know, we've, I guess in some ways I take it as a compliment that we've gotten to this point that we're all sitting here at the table saying, oh yeah, no, this has become a real thing. And, you know, there's issues that's created that we either need to solve, or we've managed to create an event that too many people love. So either way, I'm gonna look at that one pretty positively. And with any event comes risk. And, you know, obviously, we do our best to try to manage the risk, you know, in what we're putting on. When we first, you know, approached the idea of a beer tent, that was like, that was kind of moving things to another level. And the amount of care and thought that Tony and the board, you know, put into making that happen, I think demonstrates, you know, that we always try to look to mitigate the risk where we can, and put on an event that punches well above the weight of, you know, the resources that we have. We've relied on the resources of the town and, you know, all of the employees and volunteers to do this over the years. And again, I think it's a pretty amazing what we've been able to accomplish. And at the end of the day, that is what the board needs to weigh, is to say, is this event that's grown into this thing that 99.9% of people enjoy worth the inherent risks that come with that? And as a committee, that's not something we can answer for you. We can only say that, you know, we'll do our best in whatever way we can to, you know, mitigate the risks of putting on an event that, you know, has that small town feel of, you know, they raced horses down Main Street and closing down Main Street and opening up our local businesses and our societies and, you know, really showcasing what Douglas has to offer. And I think if I'm really looking big picture, if we ever want to sit down and say, okay, as a town, what do we offer? And number one priority is always schools. And then what?
Pizza.
Pizza and churches. So what else as a town are we doing to say, hey, once your kids graduated, you should stay here. You should continue to invest in this community. And, you know, I'd like to think that it's one day a year, but it's the day that everybody comes together and says, this is the best Douglas has to offer. Come enjoy. So is that worth the risks? Again, that's not a question that we can answer. That's one that's going to have to be debated and answered by the town, because they are real. There are real risks. I think any responsible person will acknowledge those risks. You know, it is obviously the job of our professionals to figure out those risks, present those risks to you, and then at the end of the day, someone needs to decide whether or not the event's worth having.
After 20 some odd years of doing this, and even experimenting once with it at Soldiers Field, having it downtown is the magic formula. It's what makes it successful. It's what makes thousands of people come out to that event in the rain, okay? Which is really unusual. They look forward to it every year. So it's the downtown feel of it's what made it successful. It's what made us grow. It's what made people come from other towns to our event. That might be a good thing and it might be a bad thing, but that's the reality. That's why we get written up as, you know, number 2 to the Big E as small town festivals, because of that. It's because of the feel of it. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, you know, that's what made this event successful, is what is downtown.
And, I don't think I think it's worth noting that a lot of organizations within and without of town use Douglas Oktoberfest as a significant fundraiser, So it's not just the event, it's the money that comes in, for Axemen.
Fire Association.
Fire Association.
It's a big fundraiser for us.
The library.
School clubs events.
School clubs, like on and on and on. It's it really is, something that
It
ripples through the
actually,
community.
because of the location too, it gives some of those areas exposure that they wouldn't have, like the library, for example. The library is actually an integral part of the event, and the Jenks store, and, other areas like that are actually physically included in the event.
Would, and it's, again, like I said, I'm not just thinking of ideas. I agree, I mean, I enjoy Oktoberfest, everybody does. You definitely don't have to sell anybody on, on the success and the enjoyment and the draw that Oktoberfest has.
If there's a way to work it out so that we can maintain the, the downtown feel there, whether it be extra details, if it's manpower problem, maybe, we can work something out, call in some help from Uxbridge or Oxford, get additional officers, if we have to do that. We'll work on that if we have to.
I guess my question is utilizing, like, thinking where it is, like the Jenks store, and then utilizing Depot Street coming up towards the municipal center, and then still utilizing the church lawn, that common area. Like, it's almost like shifting it 180 degrees, which would still leave Main Street open to a certain extent, and you'd be migrating all that traffic up towards us.
There was a time when we had Oktoberfest down there, when we had Main Street open, okay? You do not want to do that again. You just don't. Because now you have people running back and forth across the street. That's really dangerous.
It's just an idea. Because I figured it mitigates, it causes some additional issues with people trying to get across the street where you can deal with that with details. But it definitely takes tractor trailer trucks going over that bridge off the table.
The committee is very happy to work with everyone that needs our help, and we definitely need all of your help to make sure everyone is as safe as possible. We have always reached out to whoever we needed to if we had a situation of, we had a question or we didn't know what to do, because that's what should be done. We reach out to wherever we have to and say, we don't know what to do. What are your suggestions? What do we do? So we are more than willing to work with everyone we need to. We hear what you're saying. We're trying to figure out how to make it all work. And the hours, we put in a full year. Tony puts in, and John and Keith put in a full day on Friday to put the thing together, and that day is ridiculously crazy. Don't even try to talk to us during that day, because we're putting on the event, and it's in like a 14-hour day for us. And, nope, I'm his other half, so I can do that. But I just wanted to let you all know that we hear what you're saying, and we want to work with you. And if we have, if we could get together to have meetings to discuss this and do what we need to do to help you do what you guys have to do for safety, that's not a problem.
When we do that, when we do the event, and we shut down at like 4 o'clock, 4 or 5 o'clock, all the vendors start packing up and go. At 6 o'clock at night, that night, when you drive through downtown, you'd never know that there was 15,000 people there.
It's really depressing.
2 hours ago, right?
It's really depressing.
Not when you have to clean up the whole mess.
You have a question, Mike?
No, just a statement. The whole purpose of having this come up now is to work together and come up with a solution. There is no argument as to whether or not anybody's passionate about keeping this Oktoberfest going forward. That's why we're bringing it up. The chief both chiefs and John have a legitimate concern. You're taking 80,000-pound trucks as a max, going over a bridge that's rated for 36,000 pounds. I've asked the town administrator during this week, whose liability is that? Would the insurance company cover us if, in the event that something catastrophic happened with that bridge? And the answer was, no, they wouldn't. That's what our concerns are. So I mentioned it on, I think, December 7th that I wanted to talk about this, to afford a proper time so we could work through these issues. And that's why I asked Rich Bowen, how long would it take to get approval to get a one-day permit to block the trucks from coming in? Nobody's trying to push this thing away. Everybody appreciates all the efforts that the four of you put in, and I'm sure there's other people that help you along the way. I wouldn't want to take on that task.
We have openings on the committee if you'd like to.
I can give you the list of the ones that I'm on already. I'm all set with joining anything else. But with that being said, we're just trying to work together as a team and come up with a solution. So they come in and say, well, it's going to go away if it's going to change. You got to be open-minded and try to work through this as a group and see how we can accomplish it. The police chief has a very legitimate concern with trying to navigate the traffic around there. Fire chief has a very legitimate concern. If we had an emergency, how do you get to it? These are real situations that we have to acknowledge. And there's got to be a way that we can figure out how to make this work. If we can get a one-day permit, as Rich suggests, maybe that's the answer, because cars aren't a problem, and it's easy to move a car around. So.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want you to think that, you know, when I say that the practical effect of moving it off Main Street is that, you know, that the event won't exist. I'm not trying to be petulant when I say that, you know, like, well, we'll just take our ball and go home. It literally is just, that's what we're working with. That's the choices we have, is that if we move it off Main Street, you know, there's just no desire from the four of us to move the event, you know, and so, and again, I will help anyone who wants my job.
No.
You know, like,
I get
you know,
I get it. There's some frustration there, and that's your.
It's not frustration. Like I said,
Well,
because
the subject comes up, so you would get frustrated with it, and I think that we could work through this and find a solution to it.
Yeah, no, and that's all of our
Try
hope.
to come up with something.
Yeah, that's all of our hope.
I haven't heard anything negative from any of these guys. One of them sitting anywhere else about the Oktoberfest. Everybody liked it. Matt was down, he spent the day there at the Oktoberfest. I'm sure he didn't drive from Westport because he was had nothing to do on Saturday. He must have came down to enjoy it as well.
Headed up from Westport with a carload of kids.
They had a blast. I wonder have you guys ever discussed with the school department the ability to park cars up there and have a shuttle take people down to between the post office and then just turn around and go back up?
Every year at the end of the event, we have a post-event meeting and talk about pros, cons, successes, and struggles.
Yeah.
We recognize that parking is one of the issues, and we've started tossing around the idea of parking somewhere else remotely and shuttling people back and forth.
And never so much as last year.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us anticipated the pent-up demand to do something, you know, that came with a post-apocalypse, you know, event. So, again, you know, while it was a headache for you guys, and I appreciate that, I got to admit I had a certain glow of seeing cars literally parked all the way up past, you know, Town Hall. So it was like, wow. On both sides, right, yeah.
Nick had a glow too, but it wasn't.
If you could release that pressure a little bit though, because what the chief found himself trying to do is trying to enforce no parking that people had ignored. Then when you bring in a tow truck, there's no place for the tow truck to go to pull away the offenders. So now everybody's jammed up. So if we could spread that burden out over more territory, lots of people do this, right? So I grew up in Cumberland,
Yeah, and-
we had Cumberland Fest. And at one point, we were shuttling people on buses all the way down to St. John Vianney Church, all the way up to Diamond Hill State Park. And people didn't complain. Like the first year, it was like, oh, wow, that's a long ride. But then they realized, wow, the bus is picking me up. I'm not really walking anywhere. I'm safe. And the buses ran enough, so once the park was full, there's a huge parking. Yeah, once that was full, all that extra satellite parking worked to alleviate the burden right around the festival. So there's an option that we can talk about. We can talk about what the expense would be and how we would defray that expense. A truck exclusion might be worth looking into. Now, I anticipate next year that Gilboa Street will be ripped to shreds. So a smart truck driver is not really going to attempt to navigate Gilboa Street into downtown Douglas. There's a broader discussion, which is we want to slow down and actually
Discourage.
discourage as much traffic in downtown from our logistics partners as we can. Maybe it's with raised crosswalks, maybe it's with an aggressive roundabout at North and Gilboa, just to make it so unpleasant for even a professional truck driver to try to navigate that they start to think, I'm not getting from 146 to 395 by going on Route 60. That's a general thing that we could do. It would probably actually not detract from the festival at all, right? So raise crosswalks, those things are going to change. So these are the ideas we've got to put on the table and cost out and make sure they're practical before we can make any kind of decisions about it. The only thing that's non-negotiable is general counsel from Maya advised they will not cover us if we send a truck over Mechanic Street and it collapses the bridge. We're on our own. And the problem there isn't just to clarify any misunderstanding people have, that's a Stone Arch Bridge. So is North Street. The difference is in the integrity of the abutments. So Mechanic Street Bridge, it's where the bridge attaches to either side of the river, where the weakness was and where repairs have had to be done. That's not capable. That's why a weight restriction was put on that bridge, and there is no weight restriction on North Street. It's just the status of the abutments. So that's, if we can just, that's not going to be an easy problem to solve. The other thing that comes to my mind, Mr. Chairman, board members, is we really have absorbed this in the town budget for years. It's part of Kent's budget, part of everybody's budget. We really should break it out and make sure we have enough money for extra personnel so that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul at the end of the fiscal year. If we need to call other people in, we shouldn't hesitate to get staff to second ambulance, yada, yada, yada. I think some of what we deal with is we're trying to do all that. And then it causes this ripple effect, backfilling a shift, getting an overtime, that goes well past the one-day event, because that one day is a 24-hour shift for his crew, right? So if we can take the financial pressure off, that might help us deal with it as well. That's just a few random thoughts, but we have the general issue of semi-trailers going through Route 16 in Douglas is not just about Oktoberfest, it's about a lot of things. School buses letting out, guys parking their food delivery truck in basically the middle of the bleeping road in front of the library, and none of us can go anywhere. That's just a more general issue.
The vain attempt of backing fuel delivery into extra max.
Yeah.
Chief, if we address, or chiefs, I should say, if we address the traffic problem at the beginning of the conversation when you guys had the floor, that was part of the problem and not all of the problem, and I understand exactly what you're both referring to. If we're able to solve the traffic problem with some of these things that we're talking about, tell me both about how you feel. You talked about a hazmat incident. You obviously talked about any kind of major incident, but God forbid something happens in our little town here that we read about every day happening elsewhere. Does that help us enough, or are there other things that you think we need to do or that you would like us to do to address those issues?
It does. I mean, right now, we've been doing and planning, I mean, your event's getting bigger and bigger, so the more people that come, the more resources we need. Right now, the traffic, I think that's the biggest hurdle, simply because we can't put those, if we can't resolve the traffic problem right? If we can't resolve the traffic problem and the truck problem, then those other things aren't gonna be that much of an issue, because we gotta get past this truck problem
Right.
before we move on to the other things. But we have resources that we utilize, and we work with Neymar and bringing the radio comm. All that is up to snuff. So we have what we need on that.
We've used it as an exercise to sharpen our tool, so that we're able to look 5 steps down the road, worst-case scenario. We have all that solved, and it's on paper, and there's a plan there, you know?
We've learned a lot over the last 2 years, but the one thing for sure is that an ambulance is wider than a normal vehicle. So if there's parking on both sides of a narrow street, then we need to get an ambulance down.
It's a big day for everybody. It's a big day for you guys. You guys put in a lot, and we don't have, our departments aren't that big. It's an all hands on deck for 10 hours. You guys, we're there at 7 o'clock with you guys, a little before 7, and 5 till after 5 till it's back opened up. And there's, we have people everywhere. Fire chief's got people everywhere, and John's people are everywhere, in and out, moving around, in uniform, plain clothes. You name it.
Is there any hope, Tony, of getting your vendors to be a little bit more compliant with setup time? That complicates things. No, it really does.
Can we borrow tasers? I think is the-
It might just be, if you're not here by a certain time, don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, we can work on that. We can work on a procedure for loading and unloading. We thought, it was actually a little bit better this year, putting vendors in, because we closed down one way, and we had them all come in on the Cook Street entrance and do one-way traffic out. That seemed to work better. That's the kind of theory that they use on Start on the Street in
Yeah,
Worcester.
we ended up sending them around.
Yeah,
And they came.
and it seems to work better, because now we have a flow of traffic, and we don't have everybody coming from 15 directions.
Do you have a list of requirements for any of your vendors? For instance,
Yes.
if you're cooking with fats and oils, you better have a fire extinguisher, because we ran into that multiple times this past year where, nope, no fire extinguisher. Can we borrow one of yours?
You're the fire department, right?
Got a couple extras lying around.
Yeah, don't you guys bring your own?
If you could send us a list of your requirements, they can go in the listing of rules that you will have to follow.
Yep.
With the food vendors, I look over the paperwork and then I hand it over to the Board of Health. And so they realize, if it's in the paperwork that you must have this, and then the Board of Health also realizes, and then we can also put in the paperwork that there will be a fire person or a Board of Health or myself walking around. If you don't have the list of requirements that you need, you will have to be shut down.
No, but we can inspect them when they first open.
That's what I'm saying, is, I mean, that's something that I think you need to add to that list, is,
If you can all send us a list of what you would request and what you need, that will help us greatly, because we don't always know all those rules.
right.
And much like what you guys are saying, we're stretched for resources as well. So, if if there are more volunteers out there, who are willing to step up,
We'll take them.
yeah, we'll take them, because it really, last year, we actually had a really great turnout for volunteers for setup. The day before, takedown was a challenge. It was truly a challenge, because we pride ourselves on, like Tony said, that there's really not much of a trace that there was ever an event after we're done. So it was a really late night.
But the vendor setup, for example, is a good example of where we're feeling stretched thin in human resources volunteers, right? And so, for example, if we can have one end of the street staffed, or a couple ends of the street staffed with people at 7 in the morning, telling vendors, you're going that way, right? Left, not right. Because what happens is one person takes a right, and then we've got the traffic back up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like one of the themes of this evening is staffing, right? People, volunteers, getting people out helping.
And making sure we're all pulling in the same direction, because as you said, one sneaks through, And it does, it creates a ripple effect, because, we find that with the vendors, where it's like, everybody's coming this way, but someone's special. It's like,
That's a concern.
I'm with the band.
Don't pick on the entertainers.
It's a 10-hour day, so if you can go 10 hours without one trailer truck sneaking through, play the lottery.
Yes, yeah.
The chances are slim that we're gonna get through that 10 hours without something getting through that we're gonna have to figure out what to do with. That's what we want to avoid.
Yeah, and I love the idea of trying to, it would probably take a couple years for it to sink in, but I love the idea of doing a shuttle, from the schools, and to me, like, my very first thought is, like, we've already got, one of the most recognizable things of the whole event is the train, right? Everybody loves the train, and so, you get something like that, because to put in another bus is, well, you're just at the same, issue, that we're talking about large vehicles as it is. But you get something fun, some sort of trolley to that just constantly loops, you can add to the event, and really, make sure that we keep that feel while still trying to subvert traffic. I don't have an easy solution for the tractor trailers. Like I said, it's, as most of you know, I own a bus company. It's an issue, no matter where you get. Large vehicles, are an issue when you get into a place where, they moved carts. So I completely understand.
The biggest thing is, contrary to, there was a lot of feedback on social media, and I think some misunderstandings on the intent behind tonight. Nobody on this board wants to do anything that would change, jeopardize, or harm Oktoberfest. We all recognize it's a successful event. All four of you should be very proud, having grown it the way that you have. We're all very adamant supporters of the event itself, but we do have a responsibility to the community too. We want this event to take place. We just want to make sure that we can mitigate as much risk as humanly possible. And the biggest thing is we lean on Chief Miglianico, Chief Vincent, Mr. Furno, on their expertise in their areas, and saying,
So does that mean we have the police chief and the fire chief on the committee now?
that's up to them.
That's what I heard.
Highway?
Whoa.
I can't guarantee
Our meetings are
they'd-
fun.
I can't guarantee they'd be on the committee, but it would never hurt, like, after every event, to do a debrief and sit down and say, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and really lean on these guys for what they know. There's a wealth of knowledge on public safety and protocols and how to get things done. I think they'd be very helpful.
I'm certainly, and I know we've discussed it, we're willing to work with you guys and come up with whatever we can. It's gonna take some time to come up with a resolution. We'll have to do some digging into what Rich suggested, look at different traffic patterns if we have to. There's things we can do, but I think we have to have this discussion to get that we're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm. And again, it is an inherent risk, and the more popular it gets, and I hope it continues to, be popular and become more popular. But there's risk, and that's what I'm saying is, we understand that at some point there's a, it has to be weighed out, and if the event is worth the risk, then we'll continue doing it, and if it's not, then that's a decision that also has to be made.
But there's also a difference between risk and responsibility. You have a responsibility to be safe, and you have to acknowledge the fact that you can't continue to take the chance of putting an 80,000-pound truck over a 12-ton bridge. It just doesn't work. It's only a matter of time before something's going to fail, and that's the whole purpose of this. And I think everybody agrees, and it appears that everybody has a consensus. We're trying to work together and come up with a solution. And the responses that you guys have, it seems like that you're willing to do the same thing. But we can't just say, assume the risk. That's just irresponsible from everybody.
No matter how many factors you mitigate, there's still going to be risk.
I understand that.
We wanna try and
All I'm talking
minimize it.
about is the truck traffic is what I'm talking about. That's the chief's biggest concern. He understands that there's going to be a risk on the things that he's preparing for in the event it happens. But there's certain things that you need to try to prevent, such as the trucks going over this bridge. And that's the whole point of this. So I just want to make sure that when you're saying you have to weigh the risk against the event, I just wanted to be clear that we have to have a responsibility as far as addressing what the truck traffic is. And that's the biggest thing that I think.
Yeah, because you put the right things in place, and instead of having 50 trucks make it all the way through that you have to deal with, if we get one, that one that slipped through was still kind of a success, because it was only one you had to deal with instead of 40, 50 of them. So you did address the risk.
Plus, we can whack them with a big fine to pay for a new bridge.
Well, yeah, I mean, with what you're talking about doing, if that one does slip by, my understanding is now it's that company that's, on the hook for, for
I think
possible
Everything-
damage.
research for
the
this.
Conversation changes completely if we tell them not to.
Yeah, if you tell them not
What we
to,
have is
you have the authority.
Direct them to go over it.
Yep,
That's
yep.
where telling people to take the risk.
Yeah.
Did you have some color commentary?
Oh, yeah.
Chapters and sections. Sending me as-
I was just concerned that he was going to run out of battery life before we let him read it.
It's been very colorful. I just didn't want you to think I was on, tic-tac-toe or face-palm or whatever it was.
I'm pretty sure you were on both, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Never know. You're probably going to be talking to Mass DOT
Okay.
about the problem. It's all governed by the Uniform Manual for Traffic Control. Thanks, John. You have to do that all the time. So I'm going to read to you something from page 552. Hey, you guys talked for a while.
You're a speed reader.
Yes, the Evelyn Wood speed reading course. So here's what it says. A planned special event often creates the need to establish altered traffic patterns to handle the increased, I'm reading this on my phone too, traffic volumes generated by the event. The size of the temporary traffic control zone associated with a planned special event can be small, such as closing a street for a festival, or it can extend throughout a municipality for larger events. The duration of the TTC zone is determined by the duration of the planned special event. And then it goes on at some length to talk about some of the details that involve. So I think probably what you're looking for is one of these temporary traffic control zones. I've sent the blue chief and the red chief a copy of this. I'd be happy to send it to you too. I think that's probably where you're going to start, but I would begin by engaging Mass DOT, because ultimately, because you've got a state numbered road, they're the ones that are going to have the final say over which. So I think it's that rather than the trucking exclusion. It may involve a trucking exclusion of this
All right.
So red and blue, so now I have new labels for the Chiefs.
I think that's from the video game Halo, isn't it?
I mean, it seems like we can get some takeaways out of this that we can at least look into remedying some of it. You know, I mean, I didn't.
I'll research, and we have a contact at DOT for our meeting that I'll get in touch with, get some information, and see what it is exactly that we can do. Come up with some plans, some ideas, and we'll look at a few other things. Wait till we get the information from them and see exactly what we can, can't do, what they suggest, and take it from there.
Sound like a plan, guys?
Sounds like a plan.
Does it work for our red chief? Work for our blue
So
chief?
Can we have John be the orange chief?
You'd have to ask John if he's willing to be the orange.
Amber.
Amber chief.
Amber, okay.
So, thank you guys very much for at least coming in and being part of the conversation and the willingness to try and help and
Thanks
try and
for
keep
all
it
of
where
you
it's
do.
at. And
Thanks for having us.
try and save these guys some stress a little bit.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good night. All right, we're on to agenda item number 3, which is the Board of Health temporary staff for COVID-19 contact tracing and possible votes.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I think everybody's noticed, and the governor put an exclamation point on it today, that the current caseload level for COVID-19 infections is very high. Our public health nurse, our town nurse, is a stipended position, part-time position. And we ask an awful lot of her. She doesn't hesitate to work after hours to try to reach people at home, to do the contact tracing, to put the data in the database. And really has gone above and beyond the job description that she was hired to fill. She was, a public health nurse, typically involved with communicable diseases that you might see once in a great while, and they deal with simple quarantines. Pandemic came along and they were tasked to do a much larger response. We have outstripped the capacity of this one individual to comply with all of the contact tracing and requirements of the job, the data recording, the follow-up. Hiring a temporary employee is, you got to parse through the personnel policies and procedures of the town because it isn't a discrete section. The authority of the board, the authority of the town administrator, and the role of town meeting is all spread out. If I understand it correctly, and having read all of it, the town administrator can make this appointment with the approval of the Board of Selectmen. The position is not posted, so we can hire immediately. However, we can only keep that person for a maximum of 6 months, or until the funding runs out to pay the person, without bringing this position into the comp table and going to town meeting and having town meeting approve it. So the outlook right now is that we'll probably be very busy in the Board of Health for the next 3 or 4 months. At that time, we'd be at special town meeting in May. So special town meeting is the meeting we have before annual. So we would look to, if we needed to get more money into the compensation line for the Board of Health, we would do the typical house cleaning transfer from one department or one function to the Board of Health at that time, and that would take effect for May and June. After June, it would have to be in the pay scale of the town. I'm not a big fan of making temporary appointments like this. It's a little bit extraordinary. We don't have a stated emergency. However, I think the town nurse has done a wonderful job. I don't want to discourage her or give her any reason to leave us because we haven't risen to the occasion to help her get the staff that she needs. So that's where I leave it. The job description is here. It's fairly straightforward. We need someone who can, who has a bit of a medical background, can answer people's questions and give people good advice, and pay attention to the details. This position would be paid as a miscellaneous, grade 1, step 9. We had a target hourly rate of $17.88, so we're getting as close to $18 an hour as we can. That's however many dollars above minimum wage. So it's not a highly compensated position. We have a source of funds. We have small overage in the Board of Health, part-time budget line item already, so it's within the department. They have the funds for this. Are there any questions?
Pretty straightforward. You want to make a motion on this?
I was just reading the job posting itself. Does HIPAA come into this at all?
Yes.
Is there specific training that we'd be looking for not listed here, or? I know it's willful negligence is the key thing, so it
So
might be an
the-
easy bar to meet.
Individual has to go through the Department of Public Health's MAVEN training. So MAVEN is the acronym for the database that captures all this sensitive health information. The HIPAA, the confidentiality conversation is part of the training.
Okay. Yeah. Seems to me like it's an important step in getting a handle on this once again.
So
I'll
I
make a
did-
motion then to approve the job description for a temporary contact tracing position under the Board of Health, and to authorize Matt to move to hire without posting a job vacancy notice as permitted by section 2.1 of the personnel policies and procedures of the town of Douglas at the hourly rate, compensation afforded to an, this may have changed,
No, this is fixed.
an MS1 Step 9 employee for a period not to exceed the expenditure of available funds, or as Matt explained, 6 months, whichever comes first.
I will second the longest motion in the Douglas Board of Selectmen history.
It actually is. Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
No.
Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye. Hey,
Hey, it looks like he's in a Dos Equis commercial over there. All right, the next is town vehicle use and possible votes.
So I don't have anything in front of you on this. I'll tell you what I'm thinking, though, and we can prepare it for January. We have any number of town staff, senior staff, that live in Douglas, not very far away from the location where they work. And those individuals are all on call for the town 24/7. I don't think it's, I would like to suggest that it's not unreasonable that they be allowed to take their town vehicle home and return, or use it for town business to go back and forth from home. And my thinking is that I would limit that to senior staff who live within the boundaries of the town of Douglas. And that way kind of takes away the controversy of people driving to like Westport or some crazy location with it. And we all laugh, but
No.
when I was a
just-
TA in another town, we had a fire chief who lived 3 bridges away, almost 25 miles away, and he would respond to scenes from his home in Wakefield to Tiverton or Little Compton with his lights on the whole way, over the Jamestown Bridge, over the Newport Bridge, and then over the Sconnet Bridge. And it drove everybody crazy, and we get complaints the whole next, that's not what we want to do here. But just looking at the fire side of it, you have a fire chief, an assistant chief, the deputy chief, and the captain all live in Douglas, are all Douglas residents. And 3 of those people currently use personal vehicles to respond when they're out of normal business hours. So I'd like to refine that policy. I'd like to drive down on it and pull your views on. There are some things that we do now that I'm not so sure we'd be able to continue. Like if you have a second employment at the academy or some other place, I'm not so sure taking the town vehicle is something you necessarily, I think you want to talk about it before you allow it. Whether that's an extension of one's town responsibility or it's within the profession that you're in. So that's food for thought, right? But the new vehicle that just came in for Adam, who wears like 10,000 hats, I don't want that sitting there getting covered with ice and snow. Then he has to drive in from home, clean it off, and then go out. That doesn't make any sense to me. So that's what I'd like to work on. Obviously, work on it with the personnel and try to get their feelings on it.
In the interim, while we're waiting for that, so knowing that we're in the middle of the winter and sometimes writing these things out can take a little bit of time, is it something that this board can vote on now for a temporary policy until there's a permanent one put in place?
As far as I'm concerned, you're the bosses of that whole
Considering the
policy.
fact that the new truck has a plow on it, it might be advantageous to Adam to have that with him. And John as well, I see him all over the place in his personal vehicle instead of the town truck doing town business.
Town council is sharing clothes. I won't attempt to paraphrase.
Thank you, Mr. Town Administrator. Mr. Chairman. You know, if you want to do something temporary, maybe something along the lines of, I move to allow the use of town vehicles on a temporary basis as permitted by the town administrator at his discretion, and then give him a chance to pull something together to get it more formally in front of the board.
Something like that.
Matt, would you put a radius on the amount of distance from the town of Douglas that you'd allow town equipment or to leave?
That's what you want to think about and compare other towns' policies to. That's where the sticky wicket. Incidental personal use isn't something you can ever stop, right? And it's silly to do it. Oh, I just ran to get a coffee and I was in Dublin. Leave it alone. That's not going to be, that's, the end of the world isn't going to occur because that happened. Packing your family up into your cruiser and driving to the beach for the day. That's, I'm being facetious, but that's obviously not something.
Is that frowned upon?
Most places.
It may or may not have happened with the previous chief here.
Is there?
I didn't realize that. I didn't want to step on a landmine.
But he can't hear us.
No, plexiglass, yeah. Is it enough to keep the kids back there so they
It
can?
wasn't a beach
I wouldn't
anyway,
know,
it was a
for the
shopping.
record.
They're under arrest.
But I will neither confirm nor deny that I was ever a person on 146 who got lit up by the Douglas police chief while in Rhode Island. So, but that's the general thought of it, right? So you want to have a radius? Yeah, but it's more about the intent. Town business is, that's what we need to define. What does the board desire to define as town business?
Yeah, 'cause
How
I mean-
broadly do you want to draw that, or how narrowly do you want to?
Matt's three-bridge rule, in other words.
The three-bridge rule, yeah, definitely.
It can get, like, the radius can get really tricky, like, case in point with the highway department. Like, they may have to go out to Spring Rebuilders to get parts for some of their trucks, or Fleet Pride, or any one of these other places that would probably fall outside of what you'd consider a normal radius of Douglas.
Or being asked to go look at somebody else's highway barn, or
Right.
somebody else's police station. That could be a long trip, but it might be well worth it. It's part of the duties.
Well, it's been a pretty liberal policy right now, so.
Well, I don't know that, I think we kind of operate in, that we don't use it, right? I mean,
I
it
don't
stays
take a
like
vehicle
fine.
home, nor does Adam.
And in the winter, it would make the most amount of sense for you guys to take your trucks home, especially if there's a storm coming up.
Well, you have a couple different issues. If you have town personnel riding around doing town business in their own private vehicle, who covers that?
Their insurance,
Yeah,
their insurance is first. We only pick up anything their personal insurance does. So when we ask people to be employees, that's something to consider. If they're driving their personal vehicle, we're putting that on risk.
I'd kind of like, yes, I'd kind of like to at least put something in there in the interim until we do get an official policy on it. Just, as I said, specifically because it is winter time, and the amount of time that it's like, you have to drive from your house, go, brush your truck off, clean it off, hook your plows up. It's just a lot easier if it's just there, and they can go from their home and start plowing.
my idea.
Make a temporary motion.
Temporary motion.
I'll second.
No, I was telling him to make a
Oh,
motion.
okay.
I think that the motion would be
I
to,
thought you were trying to make up for the overly long motion with like a two-word motion.
was a
Like they
short
even.
motion.
short motion, yeah. Ultimately, the motion would be to allow the use of town vehicles at the discretion of the town administrator, pending a formal policy being written.
I'll second that.
Does that work?
It's good.
All right. So the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on that? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
He doesn't always vote, but when he does. What's that, Hal?
Did you hear me okay?
I did hear you
We got you.
okay.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, so we're on to personnel policies and procedures amendment regarding military leave, the second reading. Has there been any changes since the first reading?
Just the removal of firefighter and hers in specific spots. That was it.
Okay. Do we want to spend any time on that, or are we good and go right to number 6?
Second readings tend to be quick.
All right, so we're on to 6, discussion of current COVID-19 protocols and outlook with possible votes.
Not everybody's favorite topic, right? So, I think we've fought the good fight trying to keep things as normal as possible for as long as possible, and voluntary. And my recommendation to the board is that we keep it that way. We keep everything voluntary. But we do post for people's edification that under current circumstances, we strongly urge people to wear a mask when in the public spaces, the municipal center, starting Monday, December 27th, and going forward until we have a better handle on what's going on. We have the highest caseload for COVID that we've ever had by a factor of 2 in Douglas. So at the height of the surge, when everybody thought we were in the end of the world, we are actually 2 times worse than we were then in terms of. Now, we're not necessarily 2 times as bad in terms of people's experience with the condition. There have always been people who had no symptoms or mild symptoms, and there's still a large number of people who have no symptoms or mild symptoms. But elective procedures have been canceled at most hospitals in Massachusetts and neighboring states. The governor has asked us all to wear masks. We're still grinding away at contact tracing. We're still trying to get booster shots to people who want them, trying to deal with the complexity of the workplace with people with different attitudes and ability to work from home or not. So we're trying to thread the needle here. So I'm just throwing it back to you. This building, no change can be made to this building's protocol until the select board decides the policy. We'd like to ask people, I mean, started asking people today, wear a mask in public spaces. So the hallways, the labs, the kitchen when they're not eating. Nobody really knows who's being courteous to whom at this point, because those of us who may have decided to get vaccines and boosters, we may be asymptomatic and yet still dangerous to someone who's chosen not to do those things. So we're protecting others from us, even if we have already done vaccines and boosters. So it's where we are, and we're hoping that the whole thing dies down after the holiday season goes by. But the new variant behaves differently, and our partner hospitals, we've basically lost about 500 ICU beds across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because of staffing shortages, and that's why we're bumping up against these capacity constraints more than anything. We don't have a place to put people. We're starting to cope with the fact that when we bring people, we're starting to get dirty looks from emergency room staff. You know, why are you here? Why are you bringing this person here? I think one's view of this thing is really very different depending on whether or not you're in the hospital. And looking from the inside of the hospital out, the view of COVID is very different than it is for those of us circulating around, doing our shopping and all the things that we do. They are up against it, I think it's fair to say, virtually everywhere. So, just teeing it up for you that at some point in the future, if we end up with, whatever today, 100 some odd cases in Douglas, if we got to 200, we might have a conversation about going back to the way we were. We locked the door here, we encourage people to use electronic filing, using the Dropbox, et cetera, remote meetings. I'm not entirely sure we're there yet, but we're getting closer, and I just thought I'd put the board on notice that the time may come in the next couple of weeks where we have to do something like that. Are you okay with the voluntary mask policy and encouraging it?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a good first step, for sure.
Works for me. All right. We don't need to vote on that, right?
No,
No, okay.
just made my report much shorter later on, so.
All right, I am going to take an item out of order, the FY 2023 budget outlines and possible votes.
Bob is here, so we can do this now, or trying to look around. I think we've got people here for both this, for the Gilboa Street funds conversation and for the licensing conversation, so.
All right. Probably makes sense that licensing would probably go a little quicker, you think?
So just in case, I know that the building commissioner and the fire chief is still here for that, so maybe we could just do that so they can leave if they want.
All right, so with the permission of the rest of the board, as opposed to going over 2023, can we go to item number 9? Review the 2022 license renewals and possible votes. Which consists of about 85% of our packet. And trying to make it go easier, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, we've got fire chief and building official is signed off and good on pretty much everything that we have in our packet.
Pretty much, for common vic and liquor, yeah.
Okay.
Is that right, chief? And fire as well, building and fire.
That's helpful. And the only outstanding issue we have under those, the common vic and liquor licensing, would be
An outstanding excise.
an outstanding excise for the picket fence.
Yeah.
Question on Attorney Ball. We can do an approval based on them shoring up that excise tax by the 31st?
That's an interesting question, Mr. Chairman. The town has bylaw, which is modeled after, I believe it's Chapter 40, Section 57. In the old days, it was called the REAP law, Revenue Enhancement, something or other. But it was basically a leverage to collect overdue fees and taxes. The way it works is that if somebody's overdue on something, the tax collector prepares a list, identifies those who are a year in arrears, and I don't know how far back this particular person is.
Within the year, last year's, 21.
So when it gets to the 12-month period, well, you don't have to wait the 12 months, but if somebody who's on a list, and it shows that they're 12 months delinquent for any fees or taxes, you are allowed to hold a hearing to consider suspending or revoking the license for non-payment of the overdue fees or taxes. So to answer your question specifically, you could vote to renew this license. you certainly could send them a friendly reminder saying, get it and pay. If it happens that it gets to the 12-month period, ask the tax collector to prepare a list showing everybody who's delinquent for 12 months. Their name would perforce appear on the list, and at that point, you send them a notice on time, date, and place. Board of Selectmen hold a disciplinary hearing to consider the warning, suspension, revocation of your license for failure to pay an overdue fee, see attached, be there or be square. So at that point, the wise delinquent license holder gets in to see the tax collector, works out either a payment agreement if it's a big number, or just pays up. If neither of those things happen, you hold a hearing, and you could take disciplinary action. So, my recommendation would be you take your vote. If there's no other reason to hold up the renewal, just renew it, and then bring them back and deal with it when you hit the 12 months. But in the meantime, send them a letter saying, hey, you don't want it to get to 12 months.
Question, isn't that in our bylaw that it's a requirement for the renewal?
I don't believe it's in the bylaw. And in any event, and this is a liquor license?
Both.
Common vic
Okay.
and liquor.
Yeah, and in any event, what Chapter 138 says is that a non-renewal can only be for cause, and anytime you use the words "for cause," that connotes, the full panoply of notice and hearing and so on. So even if we were so inclined tonight to not renew it, we probably couldn't do it because there isn't a letter out to them and they're not here. Now, suppose, we sent the letter out, and usually we want to give them 2 weeks. So, let's just suppose we were going to do it on December 31st. Close enough, I guess. And you took a vote not to renew for the non-payment. There'd be an argument on their part that your bylaw, Chapter 40, Section 57, set out a process by which you're supposed to do this. So it's probably not worth doing.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question.
No, yeah, and I'm sorry to be.
Yeah, we have a big checklist and that thing's not on it, but
Yeah.
I thought it was in the bylaws.
Yeah, no, there's a way to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that being said, anybody want to make a motion to approve the alcohol and common vic licenses as presented? We know that those are all good by the fire and building inspector.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morse, aye.
Cortez, aye.
All right. And then that leaves us with automatic amusement, Class 2, entertainment, and pool table. Do we have any known issues with any of those? Or,
I believe the class 2s are being done in January. January for the class 2 license.
Yep.
Yeah. So those haven't been inspected, or the ones that need it. Some don't because they're out of their homes and they're online sales. But those will be done in January.
Well, in the meantime, I'll make a motion that we provide a license renewal for automatic amusement for the Breezy Picnic Grounds and water slides. That appears to be in good shape.
I'll second.
motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morse, aye.
Cortez, aye.
Do you have anything else outstanding?
Pool table,
Oh, pool table licenses.
entertainment. Pool table, there's 2. All the paperwork's there, they've paid. Well, I'll just read them off. That would be for the Sokol and Whitensville Fishing Game. For pool table.
Make a motion that we approve the pool table license.
I will second that motion.
Okay, motions have been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Patrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
And then 3 yearly entertainment. That's for the Beagle Club, Douglas Orchard and Farm, and Sokol.
Seeing that all the paperwork is in and the fees have been paid, I make a motion that we approve the yearly entertainment license renewals for those 3 entities.
Second.
Okay, motion's made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Just for the record, I'm a member of the Beagle Club.
Duly noted, sir.
Thank you.
Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
Davis, aye.
All right, that takes care of our licenses then, right?
It's Class 2. I don't
Class
know
two.
what you.
Class 2 in January, you said.
Right. I don't know, I didn't know if you guys were approving tonight and then issuing once the license, once the inspection is done.
So approve the class 2 with the caveat that all necessary inspections are completed.
Second.
Third.
Motion's been made, seconded, and thirded. Any further discussion?
No.
Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Bone and I.
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
Davis, aye.
Now we're done with licenses. You're very welcome. Are we good to go to agenda item 7? We've got all the necessary parties here. Okay.
So I'm going to try to share my screen so that Al can see.
Wow. That's you're not allowed to do that, but
Bob, you're good. No one looks and you sneak out of the
have a
table.
good night. Thank you, guys.
Night, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Rich. Somebody should call one of the Kevin Morses and report this.
That's funny as hell.
I'm going to need Lisa to go over here, and I'm going to go over there. Do I need you to move the slides? All you have to do is click the down button. Taking a good.
Oh, you want, that's yours. Please proceed out there.
All right, I'm going to pass this around, hard copy. There's more than enough for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
And Lisa, I'm going to put a copy on Lisa. Actually, this is mine.
For Kevin.
Yeah, I'll put one there when it comes over.
I'd ask the minute taker to, in the minutes, note that this is part of the discussion tonight. She needn't write.
Can I ask everybody to use their lights? Some of the conversation is fading on them.
Can you hear me, Hal?
I can hear you now, yeah?
Okay. The purpose of this conversation tonight is to bring the select board up to speed on the select board up to speed and anyone else who's following this project on what exactly is involved in getting us to the point where we actually have a project fully funded. And we will, Bob and I will spare you watching the kielbasa being made, but it's still kielbasa, right? There are still a whole bunch of things that you wouldn't normally think of that go into the final product. And the bottom line is, starting on page 1, the project outline. I'm going to skip the agenda, so I'm going to go down. Actually, the agenda is we're going to go over the outline of the project very quickly, the total budget, and we'll spend a little bit more time on the funding structure parameters, the proposed procurement structure, the recommended funding structure for the project. Unfortunately, this isn't as simple as, we have an $8 million project, let's go get an $8 million grant. And everybody shakes your hand and says, congratulations, you got an $8 million grant. And then you just start to spend down. That's the way a lot of our grants go. It's easy peasy. We sign a contract with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we're off to the races. We try to beat the budget and give them a little bit of their money back. So we get a fire truck, the brush truck is going to work exactly that way. This is not that kind of project. This is an economic development infrastructure project with many moving parts and lots of rules, and we have to comply with every single rule in order to be able to spend the money that we have either been awarded already or that we're applying for. So just to remind everybody what the project is, the overall goal is to complete all the water and sewer infrastructure system improvements and expansions necessary to support the private sector construction of 2 warehouse distribution buildings, and then to accrue any incidental benefits that we can get along the way. One is the Skinnell building on the other side of 146. The other is CRG, which is all in Douglas. And then there are the incidental benefits. One is we would take 120 Gilboa Street off their surface water source for fire suppression. So right now, the mill building ties into the pond across the street to run the sprinkler system. By putting good, strong, solid fire flows down Gilboa Street, they will connect to our public water supply and much more reliable and longer duration fire suppression effort. We'll resolve a water hammer condition on Gilboa Street where we have a small pipe dumping into a larger pipe. The larger pipe was installed in case we ever did this kind of project, but it had the unfortunate consequence of actually creating pressure and flow issues. A looped water line will aid fire flows to the entire area. So if one leg goes down, the other leg is still pushing water into the system. So this project contemplates that water will loop down Northeast Main, across the CRG property, hook up to Gilboa Street. So you'll have that loop. The final paving, this is a nice little gimme. At the end of the day, when the project's all over, and the trench patch has been there for a full year, there will be curb-to-curb repaving at Gilboa Street. So Gilboa will be new from the town line, actually all the way from Skinnell, where it's Lackey Dam Road, over all the way to North Street. So we can take that out of our pavement management plan going into the future. On the water system and sewer system, the text here, there's just a little bit of detail. I don't know that I want to spend a lot of time on it. We'll be running a 12-inch main from North Street to Skinnell and extend, as I said, to Northeast Main. It's important to mention that CRG, at its own expense, will make the connection from Northeast Main to Gilboa Street. They're going to put all that pipe in, make the connection themselves. The sewer system, we're going to extend the service from our existing, the end of service, which is right around, I believe, Bob's going to correct me because I always screw it up. It's the Shell station, though, right? Is our last customer?
Correct.
Okay.
For sewer? For sewer?
Yeah.
For water?
Water, sewer. Where's the sewer end?
Sewer.
120.
Sewer ends at 120 Gilboa. That's it. I knew I'd screw it up.
That's the mill, right?
Yep.
At
So
the
we'll
pump
go
station.
from the pump station there over to the Skinnell building with sewer. The total budget for all of the estimated costs, including all contingency planning, this is an $8,507,093 project based on our current estimates. By each utility, the water portion of this is just call it 4.6 million. Sewer is about 2.7 million. There's about $865,000 worth of engineering. And then this will become an issue we'll talk about. When you seek a grant from the Economic Development Administration, which is part of the Department of Commerce in Washington, there's a mandatory 10% contingency across the entire budget that gets tacked on, and that becomes part of your quote-unquote grant project. They will not, you have to show that you've put a 10% contingency in. So when you add it all up, the 10% contingency on all materials and labor that we already built in, plus the 10% contingency required by EDA, the total amount of the budget that is associated with contingent funding and is not associated with a specific price quote for labor and materials is about $1 million. So this is the whole stack. This is what we have to try to fund. Are there any questions at this point? Does anybody want me to clarify what I've said? So that's kind of the easy part. So what are all the crazy rules? MassWorks, when we applied, we showed the entire budget, and we're in a 50-50 match with them. When you apply for federal funds, the federal ratio is 80-20, and that 80-20 match is against any portion of the project that's been broken into a discrete deliverable that is eligible for EDA funding. So EDA is not going to look at the whole project budget and say, yeah, we'll take a chunk of that. What they want, the only thing they will fund is a discrete portion of the project. They want to know that once they've sent you their last dollar, that the project you set out to complete is complete. And that's been emphasized to us on the phone many times. Whatever we fund for you, you have to show us that you're going to finish it.
Soup to nuts.
Soup to nuts. We are currently applying for an EDA grant of $3.3 million. All right, so that is in process. EDA is different than MassWorks. MassWorks is annual. EDA is quarterly. The application process is rolling. The award process is rolling. The deadlines are kind of soft. The next soft deadline is in March. Our goal is to get the application in well before that and actually have a decision from the funding committee before the end of March. Federal funds cannot be used as a match for a federal grant. There is an exception to that rule. It does not apply to Douglas, because we are not an entitlement community under the CDBG program. So what that means is the funds we got from ARPA, those are United States Treasury funds. Those are federal funds. We cannot use ARPA to match EDA. The only eligible matches for EDA would be MassWorks, or our private partners, or town or water commission funds. Okay? The EDA grant cannot be used for engineering. They're not allowed to use it for soft costs, and the EDA grant cannot be used to pre-purchase any items before the grant is awarded. So you can't do a retroactive grant. So we'll get into this in a second, but if you're under time pressure and you have long lead items and you need to order them right away, and you have the funds to do so, you should just do so and not wait for EDA to come around, because it'll be March. And then you have to have an order to proceed from the EDA engineer, which may take another couple weeks to achieve. And just, this is an important backdrop, our private sector commitments. When we applied for MassWorks, our two private sector partners pledged funds. CRG actually pledged 1.4 million, but the original pledge, the letter that we had, was 2.282 million, and Scannell 1.08 million. We're going to take that and run with that. That is a public document. Our private partners said that that is the amount of private funds they would put into this overall project. So before I even get into the nitty-gritty, what we've tried to build is a funding stack that is taller than the budget, so that if the EDA grant is not awarded to us, we still have identified the funding source that will fund the project. So we have about $11.5 million worth of money identified to pay for an $8.5 million project. We're hoping that EDA comes through with the $3 million grant, and that we can keep the ARPA funds for other purposes, and that our private sector partners might be able to use their funds as leverage with the gas company for the third utility. That third utility is not part of this project at all. We are not funding any gas with this. So the proposed procurement structure, these rules have forced us to break this project into discrete contracts that we can fully fund, that meet the project demands and still allow us to meet our matching requirements and get the work done on time. Contract number 1 would be a materials-only contract that would go out under 3039M, I believe. And this is actually often the recommended way to procure for public works projects. Contractors are usually relieved that they're not going to be chasing supplies, that we're going out to bid for the supplies ourselves, and that we'll have them on hand when they get here. And we don't pay the markup. So if they go out and get pipe, we're not paying a 25% markup on the pipe. We paid a bid price. The EDA will not participate in this part of this. So we had to separate most of the water project from anything that we put in the EDA grant application. So that's why this is here. The other reason why this is here is because we are all living in a world with supply chain problems. So getting all this pipe secured and delivered and on site in time required that we go out to bid immediately. So Stantec and our engineer from Stantec is preparing a materials list, and this will go out under the town signature, under our management here, and the central register and everywhere else, to get competitive bids for the pipe. The pipe must be sourced with American steel, cannot come from foreign sources. So we will comply with that federal mandate. Contract number 2, therefore, would be what is the rest of the water project? So that's the labor and installation. Okay? So there involves the necessary police details, at the end of the project, the milling and the overlay, and then the actual installation of the water. Contract number 3 is the contract we will let out and try to fund with the federal money from EDA. After talking with Bob Sullivan, it was clear that it's much easier to obtain sewer pipe, which is plastic, versus steel water pipe. We don't need the long lead time to get plastic pipe. And the amount of money required to finish this project fit very neatly with EDA's expectations, what they're willing to fund. A really big EDA grant would be somewhere between $3 million and $3.5 million. Basically, we were told we would not get more than that, and that we would have to make a very strong case to get more than $3 million. I think we're going to be close to making that strong case. So the non-essential water, so that's the leg of the water that goes down Northeast Main, is also included in this. So the sewer and the non-essential piece of the water project. And contract number 4, since nobody really wants to that the federal government wants to pay for soft costs, we had to break out all of our engineering. So this is all in. The bidding, the construction supervision, the closeout, the punch list, everything is an $865,000, which is just a little bit more than 10% of the total project cost, so it sounds right. You know, the knee-jerk reaction would be that that's right. The recommended funding structure on the next slide shows you how we're going to pay for these things. We'd like to allocate MassWorks 100% to fund the $550,000 contract. The water installation would be state money with private funds as the match. Contract number 3 would be, we're hoping mostly EDA, and then the only thing we have available to leverage that would be MassWorks. And then contract 4 would be some combination of MassWorks and private match, kind of depending, right, on how much of each resource is left for the engineering. The engineering will be making progress payments, so I think we just need to identify where we're liquid and any eligible, as long as it's eligible funding source. Obviously, this is complicated. I am reluctant to make too many more decisions without checking in with you guys as the chief executive board for the town. If you're comfortable with this funding structure, we do have next steps to take. We do need to vet the overall funding approach with the state powers that be that gave us the MassWorks grant to make sure that they think that this is the way they want to go with it. We do have to complete the EDA grant application, get it in on time. We'll have to work with Gene. So just because we've identified the funding source, we still have to get the money out of the account. And there's going to be fits, I'm sure, as to MassWorks. We're probably going to present them with invoices, and hopefully before the terms of payment expire, we would get the money from MassWorks. So the expenses would be approved, and we would get the check to satisfy those resources. EDA might be a different story. We may have to do that on a reimbursement basis. We're going to explore all of this with town council and the town accountant to make sure. And lastly is the private match. So how do we take in those funds? How do we properly account for their contribution to our project? Bob over here doesn't have a lot of hair left because most of what he had left, he tore out trying to figure out MEPA. Long story short, that Scannell project on the other side of 146 had a pre-existing MEPA approval, and they got approved with on-site sewer disposal and grabbing water from the Whitensville, the private company in Whitensville. When Douglas got the grant, their preferred solution, I think, they didn't tell us that, but I think that's what it always was. Their preferred solution is to give us their sewer to take our water. It just made a lot more sense. If we could get them the utilities, that's what they wanted. So they had to go back and tell MEPA, hey, we need to amend our MEPA review so that you realize that we're not doing these things, we're doing something else. And all eyes turned to Douglas. Well, you're going to be digging under 146. Are you going to trigger MEPA review? We think the answer is no. But Bob parsed out all the details. We've sent it on to able counsel for review. I think we're going to have a conversation amongst all of us on the positions that we've taken in the MEPA application process. But really, I think Bob did a lot of work here, and it's pretty clear that we don't qualify for MEPA review. We just need agency action to get us clear. That is where we stand. I stole all of Bob's thunder, but if you have any questions, I'm going to let him answer them. Because I tried to boil this down so that it's something I could explain, because if I can't explain it, then it's hard to.
Matt, on the private funding question, let me find it. The number listed here was
2.2.
2.2, and they also said they had 1.4.
You want to explain how that number changed?
You're looking at funding structure?
Funding structure.
So how did CRG go from 2.28? I mentioned that they were at 1.4 in the MassWorks application, so.
In the MassWorks, we used, I'm trying to think, I think we used some of the town ARPA funds. And the CRG number can be anywhere from that 1.2 to well beyond 3 million.
Yeah, so in the original application involved gas, and it was a $12 million project. And CRG said, you can use, we'll put in 2.282. Our friends at MassWorks kind of basically said, we're not funding gas, go away. So we took gas out. When we did that, we reduced everybody's contribution pro rata.
The Scannell stayed at 1 point because that's a 50-50 match of their water sewer extension.
But as far as I'm concerned, just negotiation-wise, and knowing that CRG is a willing partner helps, we're going to hold them to the 2.282 that they originally pledged, because we'd like to hold on to our ARPA funds and not use them for this if we can help it. Plus, it gives them skin in the game.
All right, so we're not counting money that isn't actually there, where
We're counting money that is there.
it is there. Good.
Now, keep in mind that natural gas, because MassWorks forced us to pull it, it is still there. We need it. So we're trying to play a shell game to keep the developers lower, use as much federal and state money as we can to allow the developers to approach natural gas, because that's a $4.5 million project in itself.
I always say to Bob, shell game implies deception. We're not trying to deceive anybody, but we had to shift what was going to fund what, because if the state says we're not going to fund gas, but these guys say, I want a pad-ready site with gas,
Yeah.
well, whatever money they put up, if they don't spend it on their water and sewer, we hope that they're going to use that as leverage to get gas on their own, in a private negotiation with Eversource that hopefully doesn't involve us, because we might strangle them if we have to talk to them again. Eversource has been a very difficult partner in economic development conversations. I'll leave it at that. There's no need to burn bridges, but they just don't see it the way we do. They want to be shown that they're going to be rich in 3 days after they hook up the pipe, and that's not even a realistic conversation. A realistic capital committee and a private sector company would have already put gas into 120 Gilboa because they would have made their money back in a year and a half. That they haven't, because they drag their feet on this stuff. They don't have a franchise, blah, blah, blah. Enough already. So we kind of I like the idea that our private sector partners walking point on this and trying to push the conversation with Eversource, because they have more leverage. They're doing projects all over the Commonwealth in Eversource territory. So they can have the conversation that we can't, because we're a one-off. We're a town with no franchise.
If you say shell game again, I'm going to tell Gene.
Don't see him.
All you have to do is tell Gene that Bob found money.
Yep.
What's that, Hal?
Who's taking the lead in negotiating with Eversource?
Private partners, and I'm getting involved, have always been involved as well.
We figured out that some of their execs live in Douglas, so we sent Bob to stalk them.
He has retired.
Yeah.
He was only 27, but he retired just to get away from Bob.
When you see Bob's truck parked in front of somebody's house, it's not his, you're like, it must be Eversource.
But just keep in mind, it is a $12.5 million, $13 million project.
What's important to us is we want gas to come so that we're not tearing up a brand-new road to put it in, right? It makes the most sense to have all three utilities done at the same time.
The road's open, lay it down.
Especially a road that's already been trenched before.
Three trenches, one paving a year later. Plus, it's close to the school, which is a good launch point for next year's discussion.
I heard we're going to save money because you're going to go out and personally dig that, like shovel the whole.
Oh, I will.
pond.
And Mr. Fitzpatrick's going to help me.
I hope you get the tractor started, you can go do it.
Does anybody else on the team want to add to what, I'm curious about your comfort level. Is this what you expected from this? But those are the open-ended questions I want the board to sort of, if we're not going in the right direction, steer us differently now, because it's going to get harder to uncommit. Sure.
The EDA is a 80-20 match. It's a $4 million total project cost, of which EDA is giving us $3.3 million. Our match is $828,000.
And I'd like more than 2 cents from you.
3. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Matt had sent Bob's draft letter to me for review and more or less told me to drop everything and look at it because of the time sensitivity, and I've done that. I think Bob's letter is an excellent letter. The conclusions in it are reasonable. I recommend sending it as is now, because it's going to be a question of whether they accept it or not. So you might as well get it out there and on the table and see what they're willing to do with it. I think it's a reasonable letter, and I think it has a pretty fair chance of being accepted.
Okay.
Works for me.
If anybody wants to review it.
So when the time comes, and we actually are going to authorize this allocation of funds, it'll be an update and not
You can just pass
from
this
the
around.
first impression, okay? But that's, right now, this is the plan we're following. But we can't sign anything without your authorization.
I think it's well thought out. I think they're going in the right way.
I don't have any issues.
Yeah, 3 months ago, it was a real simple plan.
And you made it all complicated, Bob.
Not me.
No, we're reacting.
EDA, all these restrictions,
I've seen that with other things you're involved in.
I solve problems.
I don't create them.
He retired because when he was a pilot, like, his way to get to California was via England.
It's shorter if you go over the pole.
It's a great circle route.
I have to compliment EDA. I think they've been really good to us. They've given us a lot of time to help us get through the process. So we're optimistic that we have a strong application. But that concludes our presentation of this, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, even more fun. The FY 2023 budget outlines and possible votes.
So I'm going to follow my own recommendations and ask you, it's 9 o'clock. Do you want to continue with your agenda, or do you want to call it and have this conversation 2 weeks from now?
If it's not pressing, I'd like to have it 2 weeks from now.
I would agree
prefer
with
to
that.
the rest of the board.
I'll second that motion.
Tim, you good with that?
Yeah.
I'm certainly good at that.
Hal, did he leave?
Sounded like he got
It did sound like he left.
Happy hour.
I
He
put
dropped his Dos Equis.
him to sleep.
All right, so we're gonna,
Yeah.
the general consensus is we're just gonna,
Yeah, and the same for my report. I mean, this is what we've been working on. I don't know how else to update you. I mean, I will circulate our action plan from our property and casualty insurer, because there's information in there the board should definitely know, especially the top page. In summary, our premium, our claims to premium ratio is 341%. If we were not an MMA member in Maya, we would be booted from this pool.
Really?
So we have an action plan, and we need to try to follow it so we can reduce our liability. But that will speak for itself. I'll circulate that. And that's all I have for a report, Mr. Chairman. I think minutes is what you have left.
all right. Anybody want to go through the minutes?
Do they start on December 7th?
Before we get into that, can I just ask one question? On the Gilboa Street stuff, did you need a vote on that at all?
No, it's a briefing. I will need a vote at some point, and rather than try to explain it all.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we didn't skip over it, that's all.
You were just looking for a consensus.
Tremendous amount of work done by Bob and Matt on this project, that's for sure.
More than anything, if you had an objection to the way we were going about it, I want to know about it now, so we could change course. You're
Yeah,
comfortable,
no.
and this is the course we're going to follow.
Rich had said that it's urgent to get that letter in, that's why I was
Oh,
asking.
on that, yeah.
I was just asking to make sure that you had everything you needed, that's all.
That's the letter I just sent around, just for quick review.
Make a motion that we approve the December 7th regular session minutes.
I'll second it. Made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
On a night?
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
Davis,
Moving on to December 7th executive session minutes. Move that we approve those and retain them all.
Second that. Okay, made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
On a night?
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
Davis,
All right, so that takes care of that. Matt, you've given me your report. Are there any open session topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of this meeting? Seeing as none, is there anything that is pressing for executive session that we would need to discuss this evening?
Litigation.
Litigation.
That's the only one.
All right. So
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we move into executive session for the purposes of litigation and have that meeting, the joint meeting of the Water and Sewer Commissioners, and then to leave said meeting for the purpose of adjournment.
Second.
Made and seconded, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
On a night?
Morris, aye.
Cortez, aye.
Davis,
You want us to call you, Hal?